Can you fight? My cousin asked me that in front of 30 relatives at a backyard barbecue outside Waco, Texas, while holding a paper plate full of brisket and laughing like he had just discovered the funniest thing in the world. I was 53 years old. I had dirt under my fingernails from planting tomatoes that morning, a faded denim shirt, work boots, and a pickup truck old enough to complain every time I turned the key. To my family, I was Aunt Mara. Quiet Mara. The one who grew vegetables. The one who left the army years ago after some vague discipline problem nobody understood, but everybody whispered about. So when my cousin Tyler grinned and said, "Come on, Aunt Mara, you were in the army, right? Can you actually fight, or did they just let you answer phones?" Everyone laughed. I smiled. Not because it was funny, because some people mistake silence for emptiness. Then, a man standing near the fence dropped his beer bottle so hard it shattered on the patio. He was a retired Navy SEAL named Thomas Hale. Most people knew him as Tom. But in Kandahar, in the fall of 2003, I had heard men scream his name through smoke, sand, blood, and rotor wash. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Then he walked across the yard, stopped in front of me, and saluted. My cousin stopped laughing. My sister put down her drink. My mother whispered, "What is he doing?" Thomas Hale's hand trembled at his brow. Then he said, loud enough for the entire family to hear, "Ma'am, there are 31 men alive because Hades refused to leave us in the sand." That was the first time anyone in my family heard my call sign. And it was the beginning of the end for the lie that had followed me for 20 years. My name is Mara Callahan. For most of my adult life, that name meant very little to anyone outside a few military files, a few medical records, and a few men who woke up at night still hearing the sound of a burning helicopter dragging itself out of hell. I lived in Temple, Texas, in a small house with a tin roof, a garden behind the shed, and a front porch that faced a county road where dust rose before headlights appeared. I grew okra, tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. I fixed my own truck when I could. I drank coffee black because anything sweeter felt dishonest. And I avoided memorial events, military reunions, veterans banquets, charity dinners, 4th of July speeches, and anybody who said the word hero too easily. My family thought I had been an administrative officer. They were not being cruel about it. At least, not always. They simply believed the version of my life that had been easiest for them to understand. Mara served. Mara came home bitter. Mara did not talk about it. Mara must have done something wrong because nobody leaves the military that angry unless they caused their own fall. That was the story. Clean. Manageable. Convenient. The truth was heavier. I had been a helicopter pilot attached to Task Unit 7, flying medevac and extraction missions in places where maps became suggestions and orders sometimes arrived too late to matter. My job was simple in language and impossible in execution. Go in, find the wounded, get them out. Do it while people tried to kill you. Do it in weather that turned the world into a dirty brown wall. Do it when the landing zone was not a landing zone, just a piece of ground nobody had died on yet. And do it knowing that every second you hesitated. Someone's mother, wife, son, or daughter might lose the person they were praying for. That was my job. But that was not what they remembered. They remembered the call sign. Hades! People always got that wrong. They heard it and thought death. Darkness. Violence. Some woman with ice in her veins who flew into combat because she loved chaos. They were wrong. I hated chaos. I hated blood. I hated the sound a wounded man made when he tried not to scream, because he still thought discipline mattered, while his leg was being held together by cloth and faith. The men gave me that call sign because they said, no matter how bad the place was, I would go into hell and bring people back. I did not choose it. I only tried to live up to it. The mission that ruined my life began outside Kandahar in the fall of 2003. The official report used cleaner words: adverse visibility, communication disruption, high-risk extraction environment, possible command ambiguity. Those phrases are what people write when they do not want paper to smell like burned fuel and blood. A reconnaissance element had been hit outside the city. At first, it came through as contact. Then heavy contact. Then broken radio bursts, panic hidden under discipline, coordinates repeated with static biting half the numbers away. A SEAL team was pinned down with attached Marines and support personnel. 31 men, some wounded, some unable to move. A sandstorm was pushing in hard from the west, swallowing distance by the minute. I remember the color of the sky. Not gray. Not orange. Something uglier. Like the earth had come loose and risen to punish us for touching it. Headquarters ordered all aircraft to pull back. The official reason was safety. Too much risk. Zero visibility. No reliable landing coordinates. Enemy fire near the zone. Possible RPG activity? Those reasons were real. I will not pretend they were not. A helicopter in a sandstorm is not a bird. It is a metal confession waiting to hit the ground. But then the radio cracked again. A voice came through. Not calm. Not dramatic. Just exhausted. Still alive. Need extraction. Then it cut out. That was all. Still alive. Need extraction. Those 4 words have never left me. Colonel Victor Rains was the operational commander that day. Back then, he was not yet the decorated general who would one day stand on stages and lecture younger soldiers about courage. He was a man in a command room with dry boots, a clean collar, and fear hiding behind procedure. He repeated the order. All air assets withdraw. I said, they are still alive? He said, Major Callahan, you have your orders. I looked at the storm. I looked at the grid. I looked at the crew chief, who had already heard enough to know what I was thinking. He shook his head once. Not to say no. To say, if we do this, we may not come back. I said, mount up. People think disobeying an order feels heroic. It does not. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff while everyone behind you calls your name. Your body knows the danger. Your training knows the danger. Your fear is not absent. It is so present, it becomes another person in the cockpit. But fear is not always the loudest thing. Sometimes the loudest thing is a voice through static saying, still alive. We lifted into a world with no edges. The sandstorm took the horizon first. Then depth. Then color. Then trust. Every instrument mattered until it did not. The aircraft shook like it was trying to throw us out of itself. Sand battered the windshield so hard it sounded like gravel fired from a gun. The radio came in pieces. Coordinates. Static. A curse. Someone praying. The crew chief called out what he could see, which was almost nothing. I flew by memory, instrument fragments, instinct, and the kind of stubbornness that has gotten many soldiers killed and a few saved. The first time rounds hit us, they sounded smaller than they felt. Little metallic snaps under the roar. Then something bigger flashed beneath us. An RPG missed wide. The second one did not. It struck hard enough to punch the aircraft sideways. Warning lights bloomed across the panel. Hydraulic pressure dropped. Smoke began to crawl into places smoke had no right to be. My co-pilot said my name. Not rank. Name. That is how I knew it was bad. I said, "Keep calling the ground team." He did. Again and again. Then we saw them. Not clearly. Nobody sees clearly in a storm like that. But we saw shapes. Movement. A strobe half buried in dust. Muzzle flashes. Men waving. Men carrying other men. Men too wounded to wave. The landing zone was not a zone. It was a wound in the dirt. I put the helicopter down harder than I wanted and softer than we deserved. The moment the skids touched, the world became noise. The crew chief was out before I finished shouting. Rounds hit the fuselage. Someone dragged a man with no lower leg toward us. Another came over another man's shoulder, unconscious, head hanging at an angle that made my stomach tighten. Thomas Hale was younger then. Broad-shouldered, bleeding from the side of his face. He carried a Marine who looked dead until his fingers twitched. I remember his eyes meeting mine through the storm. He shouted something. I could not hear him, but I could read his mouth. You came? As if there had been another option. We loaded them past safe capacity, then past common sense, then past anything the manual would have forgiven. 31 men, wounded piled with wounded, breathing beside bleeding, hands gripping straps, boots, each other. The aircraft was too heavy. The hydraulics were failing. Fire had found something important in the back. My co-pilot said, "We may not clear..." I said, "We clear or we die here." That is not a line from a movie. It is not brave. It is math with no good numbers. I pulled power we did not have from an aircraft that had no reason to give it. For one terrible second, we stayed on the ground. I still feel that second. The weight of it. The refusal. Then the helicopter lifted. Barely angry. Burning. Alive. The men in back started shouting. Not cheering. Not yet. Cheering comes when survival feels likely. This was something more primitive. A sound made by people who had just watched the door of death close behind them and could not believe it had missed their fingers. We flew out blind. I do not remember every minute. Trauma edits memory badly. It sharpens some things until they cut forever and blurs others into smoke. I remember my hands. I remember the smell. I remember one wounded man asking if his brother made it, though no brother was on the manifest. I remember Thomas Hale pressing his hand against another man's chest and yelling, "Stay with me! Stay with me! Stay with me!" Like repetition could anchor a soul. I remember landing at the forward surgical site and realizing I could not unclench my fingers from the controls. 31 men went in that helicopter. 31 came out alive. That should have been the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the punishment. Colonel Rains did not thank me. That was the first thing I noticed. Not because I needed praise. Praise is cheap after people bleed. But commanders usually say something after a mission like that. Good work. Hell of a job. Get checked out. We will review this later. Rains said none of that. He looked at the damaged aircraft. He looked at the wounded being carried away. He looked at me like I had returned with evidence he wished had burned. Then he said, "You disobeyed a direct order." I said, "They were alive." His jaw tightened. "I gave an order, and I brought them back." For a moment, I thought the truth would be enough. That is a young soldier's mistake. Truth matters. But truth without power is often treated like a rumor. Within 48 hours, the narrative changed. The rescue became reckless. The extraction became unauthorized. The survival of 31 men became luck. My decision became dangerous insubordination that placed aircraft, crew, and mission integrity at risk. The reports were careful. No one called me a coward. That would have been too easy to challenge. They called me unstable, emotionally compromised, unable to operate within command structure, possibly affected by combat stress. Those words do more damage because they sound like concern. Rains protected himself with procedure. He had ordered withdrawal. The men on the ground had almost died. If anyone looked too closely, they might ask why a commander had been willing to leave them there. So he made the question about me. Why did Major Callahan disobey? Was she reckless? Was she emotionally fit? Did her actions set a dangerous precedent? A board reviewed the matter. Witness statements disappeared into classified channels. Men who could have spoken were moved, treated, redeployed, or told the issue was above their level. The aircraft maintenance records were sealed in language most people would never see. The mission log became a locked door. And I became the woman who flew into a storm because she could not follow orders. My career did not end in one dramatic explosion. It was strangled. Quietly. Professionally. With signatures. By the time I left the Army, people had learned how to lower their voices when I entered rooms. Some looked at me with pity. Some with suspicion. Some with that particular male irritation reserved for women who survived something they were supposed to fail. My husband tried for a while. His name was Alan. He was not a bad man. That is important. Not everyone who leaves a wounded person is cruel. Sometimes they are simply untrained for the war that follows the war. I came home with nightmares I refused to call nightmares. I slept facing doors. I flinched at fireworks. I stopped driving when the weather turned dusty because the whole road could become Kandahar in one gust of wind. I would wake up with my hands locked around nothing. Alan would ask what I saw. I would say nothing. That was a lie. I saw everything. The storm. The hands. The blood. The faces of the men we saved. The faces of those I could not save on other days. The inside of a cockpit filling with smoke. Rains's face when he realized I had returned with living proof of his fear. Bitterness is not loud at first. It starts as a reasonable sentence. They lied about me. Then another. They used me. Then another. Nobody came for me. After enough years, bitterness does not feel like anger. It feels like personality. Alan left after our 12th year. He said he missed me even when I was sitting across from him. I wanted to hate him for that. Some days I did. But he was right. I had survived Kandahar and then built a bunker inside my own body. Eventually, everyone stopped knocking. My family adjusted to the quieter version of me. They did what families often do when the truth is too large. They made it smaller. Mom told people I had a rough transition. My sister Beth said I was private about military stuff. My nephews and cousins grew up thinking I had been adjacent to service, not inside it. At barbecues, they asked other veterans for stories. Never me. At Memorial Day gatherings, someone would thank Uncle Rob for his time in the Navy, though he had spent 4 years repairing equipment in Norfolk and had never heard a shot fired outside a range. He deserved respect. I do not deny that. But I would stand beside the potato salad while people thanked him and then ask me to bring more ice. That was easier. Being invisible hurts less when you help maintain the trick. I told myself I did not want recognition. That was true. Then I told myself recognition did not matter. That was less true. What I wanted was not applause. I wanted the lie removed from my name. But after 20 years, even that desire felt dangerous. Because if the truth came out, so would the memories. And I was not sure I could survive them twice. Then came the barbecue outside Waco. My niece was graduating from nursing school. The whole family gathered at Beth's house, which had a large backyard, a smoker, folding tables, and enough sweet tea to drown regret. Thomas Hale was there because he lived 3 houses down and Beth's husband had invited him over. I noticed him the moment I arrived. Veterans notice each other by accident. Not always from hats or shirts. From exits. From posture. From the way someone laughs with their mouth but keeps their eyes working. Thomas had that look. I did not know his name then. I only knew he carried something. I spent most of the afternoon helping in the kitchen, avoiding stories, and letting the younger ones tease me about my old truck. Then Tyler, my cousin's son, started talking about self-defense classes. He was 26, gym-built, loud, and kind in the shallow way of people who have never had kindness tested. He said something about women in combat. Someone mentioned I had been in the Army. Tyler turned to me. That grin. That paper plate. That stupid, careless sentence. Can you fight? Laughter